that you never feel ghosted, that you never feel as if the relationship has been cut off. You were talking to Him, you were fellowshipping with Him, and then nothing. And maybe that nothing is a sign that you've sinned or you failed. No, He's here to give you the Holy Spirit forever. Because you see, I believe that the love of God is the expression, the love that God showed you at Calvary is the expression of the heart of the Father. I don't think Calvary is an afterthought. I don't think the love of God was masked or clouded by the law. I think God's love has always been flowing. I believe that we get to comprehend it through Calvary. We get to intake it through ourselves through the power of the Holy Spirit. But I think we've made love an emotional thing instead of a status, instead of an identity. You see, today you are loved by the Father. You don't have to feel loved by the Father. You don't even have to have a whole lot of knowledge about what that love looks like. You accept the love of God in the same way you accepted Jesus. How did you accept Jesus? Did you meet Him physically, shake His hand, take a look at the nail scars in His hands, and then prove to yourself He's real? Probably not one of you in this room did that. You accepted Jesus by faith. You did not see Him. You can't prove to me right now that He has physical nail scars in His hands and His feet. You accept that by faith. And you took Jesus into your life by faith. That's an act of faith and you receive who He is. Did you know love's the same thing? I have faith that my wife means it when she says, I love you. How can I prove that she loves me? It's not really possible. You say, well, you could look at the things she does for you. True. You can look at the things people do for you. But it might not necessarily be love. Sometimes it's selfishness. Right? Sometimes people don't do things for you because they love you. Sometimes people do things for you because they want you to do things for them. You could mistake that as love. So my point there is, no, we don't accept it because we can prove it or because we even feel it. Because we believe it is a reality that the Word is true, that He loves us, and we receive that because of what we see happen at the cross. If I were to ask you today, what is the opposite of love? I think the easy intellectual answer is hate. I disagree. Because I think hate is active. Love is also active. How are those opposites? They're both emotions, and you're putting a lot of passion into both. I don't think the opposite of love is hate. I think the opposite of love is indifference. It's just not caring. And so it's not actively working against someone in hatred. It's just not actively doing anything at all in someone. I also think it's kind of easy to mask whether or not we love people by going, well, I must love them because I don't hate them. And the reality is the answer to whether I must love them shouldn't be whether or not I hate them. The answer to whether or not I love them should be, how indifferent am I towards their situation? If what they're going through means little to me, then I probably don't have much love for them. It has nothing to do with hate. It has to do with love. And so for me to understand the love of God, I need to see that God is not indifferent towards me. I don't have any doubt God doesn't hate me and He's not working against me. But is God indifferent towards me? Does God actively love me? And what's the expression of God actively loving me? Is it just that I feel it? Or is it the expression of who He is through the power of His Holy Spirit? Let's break this text down for just a moment. If you love me, keep my commandments. In the English, this reads very much like, if you love me, you better do what I say. And part of the reason we bring that to the text is we're more Moses-minded than we are Jesus-minded. How many of you realize that? In the Christian church, we are not in Mosesianity, we are in Christianity, and yet much of our morality is Mosesianity. And Mosesianity is do good, get good, do bad, get bad. God's watching and He's going to pay you back when you mess up. That's a Sinaitic experience. We also call that religion, because that's where you're putting on fig leaves to try to please a God you think's not happy with you. There's also a relationship where you meet God through His Son Jesus and you realize the love that's expressed through the cross and that a new creation reality is yours. And then you approach God through Christ, not through Moses. The reason we read stuff like John 14:15 and think that if you love me, you better be keeping my commandments, part of it is that we're Mosesianity. The other part is that we don't do very well with translation from Greek to English. Because really what John is saying to us in Greek is not if you love me, you better go keep my commandments. But the fact that you keep my commandments happens because you love me. The fact that you do the things that I tell you to do is because that you love me. But what are the things he tells us to do? Let's contrast. Let's make sure we know the difference here. Because if we don't, then people will have the commands of Moses as the commands of Jesus. Look at John chapter 5, what Jesus says to the Pharisees. John 5:45. Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees when he says, listen, don't think that I'm going to go to the Father and tell Dad bad things about you. I don't need to do that. You already have someone you trust, and the one you trust accuses you to God. This is a spectacular verse to me, underappreciated in Christianity. This is one of those verses that if you break this down, here's a couple of things you'll notice. If you place your trust in what Moses represents, which is a covenant of performance, you don't need the Holy Spirit to convict you to the Father. You don't need Jesus to convict you to the Father. You already have Moses who convicts you to the Father. In other words, if you want to live beneath the trust of do good, do bad, get bad, or do bad, get beat, however you want to interpret it, don't think Jesus needs to go accuse you. Moses will do just fine. So when I say to you, go back to John 14, to our text we opened with. When Jesus says to you, if you love me, you'll do what I command, Jesus isn't talking about what Moses commands, because 9 chapters earlier he said, if you trust Moses, Moses will accuse you to the Father. So what might be the commandment that Jesus is talking about? Look at John 13, verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give you. By the way, this is only one chapter before where we open today. How many of you realize John didn't break it into chapters? Let's repeat that. John didn't break his book into chapters. He's just writing. We broke it into chapters, and that slows us down sometimes. This is all one continuous thought, by the way. John 13:34, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. How are you supposed to love one another? As I have loved you. What revelation do you need first in the world? Not love your neighbor. You had that one under Moses. What did Moses say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, all your soul, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Moses had already told you to love your neighbor. Here's a new commandment. Not just love your neighbor. That's nothing new about that. There's nothing new about love your neighbor. What's new? Love your neighbor with new equipment. Love your neighbor as I love you. What's the first revelation you need then in order to love your neighbor? You need to know how loved you are. I didn't say you need to feel loved. Remember, love you receive by faith. Love's just not just an emotion. You know how loved you are. You know how much He thinks about you. Then you know how you can love one another. And I think we inappropriately love one another in the realm of the Spirit sometimes. I don't mean negatively or in a bad way, but sometimes don't love them maybe the way that we ought to, because we haven't received the love that we ought to. For too many of us, the love that we think we've received from the Father is based on the performance we had this week. How good we lived, how much Bible we read, how long we fasted, whether we gave in the offering, whether we made up a shoebox to send children in Africa. And we literally start to take our identity by, oh boy, I'm not sure I've done enough for God to bless me or love me. And because of that, we don't appropriately love the people around us, or at least we become indifferent to the people around us, because how can we have passion to love them if we don't know how loved that we are? So when Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, it is love each other the way I love you.